So you decide you want to grow a vegetable garden, and you go down maybe to your local gardening shop and you start looking through the seeds, or you're looking online, or you're looking in a catalog, and all of a sudden you start seeing all these words. Hybrid, heirloom, open pollinated, self-pollinated, organic, pelletized. What does it all mean? So this terminology can be quite overwhelming, but I'm going to try to break it down for you today. Again, if you don't know me, if you're new to my channel, I'm Janet, Mrs. Farmer Brown from Farmer Brown's Paradise. So basically, especially when you're starting out with gardening, unless you're going to want to try to save seeds, and we're going to talk quite a bit about that, it probably doesn't matter too much what kind of seed you buy. But for this video, I want to explain some of this terminology and kind of put it in format that I can understand and maybe you can understand. So here's the deal. There are basically, I would say, two types of seeds: open pollinated and hybrid. Open pollinated means that the seeds are going to stay true to their variety, assuming that the pollen in a variety hasn't been cross-pollinated by another variety. And that can happen. But open pollinated seeds are pollinated, well, like this. Open pollination occurs by wind, birdies, humans, and our very favorite, insects. So as I said, as long as pollen is not shared from one type to another type, then it's going to remain true to its variety. Now let's talk about hybrid seeds. Hybrid seeds are where you have one male parent, one female parent, and they come together to produce an offspring. That offspring is called an F1. It is a first generation plant. If you want to save seeds, you do not want to use hybrids. Think about it. If you have an F1 seed and you save those seeds and you replant it, there are so many different combinations of genes involved in that you more than likely are not going to get anything close to the color, the size, the flavor, the production, all of it, if you use those F1 seeds. So if you are wanting to save seeds, hybrid seeds are not what you want to purchase. I still say though, there is a place for hybrid seeds. It's just that you're going to have to buy new seed once you run out of that package of seeds. And the reason I say that, for example, in tomatoes, there is a hybrid seed called Bella Rosa, which grows beautifully in my climate. It is a hybrid, so the fruits are all about the same size. It has very good production and very good flavor. And that is why the hybrid was created, for those factors. It's a little bit disease resistant. It can take the heat and the high humidity. I typically grow those. Now that is a determinate plant, which we'll get into that when we talk about tomatoes, but that's just an example of a hybrid. Open pollinated seeds are more genetically diverse because they're pollinated by, again, remember, by wind, birdies, humans, and our very favorite, insects. So now let's talk about heirloom. Heirloom seeds are under the category of open pollinated. All heirloom seeds are open pollinated. An heirloom variety means that it has been passed down from generation to generation in a family or a community. Most seed companies feel that if that has happened and the seed is 50 years old or older, then it can be classified as an heirloom. Just like, when you're passing down family jewelry and things like that. If it's over 50 years old, jewelry, furniture, you'll say it's an heirloom. Do you have heirlooms from your family that's been passed down? I know I do. I have 2 of my grandmother's cast iron skillets. And honestly, they may have been her mother, so they could be even older than my grandmother's life. As I said, seed companies will create heirloom seeds based on their date, 50 years or older. But honestly, true heirloom seeds are ones that have a generational history behind them. A really common one, as an example, is the tomato mortgage lifter. And when we get to tomatoes, I'll be telling you that story in more detail. But basically, the farmer, the man that created that seed, was back during the Depression, and he sold so many of the seeds, the story goes, that he was able to pay off his mortgage, lifting, in other words, his mortgage. As I said, all heirlooms are open pollinated, but not all open pollinated are heirlooms. Confused yet? Okay, as I said, 2 types: open pollinated and hybrid. Well, if heirlooms are open pollinated, but not all open pollinated are heirlooms, does that mean that some of the hybrids can be open pollinated? Actually, yes. To even get it more confusing, hybrids, when they're repeatedly planted and they develop a stabilization of the seed over time, they can become open pollinated. Kentucky Wonder pole beans is an example of that. It's a hybrid, but it's now considered an open pollinated seed. All right, so the 2 types of seeds, open pollination, hybrid. Heirlooms are always open pollinated, but not all open pollinated seeds are heirlooms, because there are some hybrids, like the Kentucky Wonder pole beans, that become stabilized over the years and they become open pollinated. Let's talk about some other terms. Organic. You'll see some seed packages that say organic. What does that mean? Well, it means if a farm, in this country, for example, it's regulated by the USDA, and they determine the parameters for you to be labeled certified organic. And that takes a number of years for that to happen. So really, it's kind of like a philosophy. I grow organically. Do I only have organic seeds? No. I do buy organic seeds where I can from an organic seed farm, but if I can't find a seed that I want, I'm not going to not buy it just because it's not been created or grown on an organic seed farm. But I do try, even though they're more expensive, I do try to buy organic seeds just to help support those farms that are putting in the effort and the money to grow everything that they have there in an organic fashion without using any kind of chemical fertilizers or chemical pesticides. I mean, the difference in organic is basically a philosophy of how you manage the land and how you're going to grow. Another term I mentioned was pelleted. Well, what is that? It's really not a big deal, although it might be helpful to you when you're planting seeds. It's basically just a coating. There's a company, Fairy Moss, that does a lot of these pelleted seeds. Seeds that are really, really tiny, like lettuce, for example. So tiny. What they do is they put a coating around the seed to make it easier for you to handle and plant it. And the coating dissolves once it is planted in the ground. And the coating is really just made of normal things like clay or lime or perlite. Sometimes they put a coloring in it just to help you see it a little bit better. But once you plant it, all that coating just dissolves away and your seed is there to grow. So we covered open pollinated, we covered hybrid, we covered heirloom, we covered organic, we covered pelletized. Oh, we haven't covered self-pollinated. Where does that fit in? Well, self-pollinated can fit into either category. It can be in an open pollinated, it can be in a hybrid, and it can also be in an heirloom, which is under open pollinated. So what does self-pollinated mean? Well, to understand that, you kind of have to go back to biology just a little bit. Self-pollinated plants are those that are considered to have the male and the female parts all in the same flower. If it's not self-pollinated, then you have a separate male flower and a separate female flower. So you've got to have a bee come down and get pollen out of this male flower and up to the female flower to pollinate it. Examples of those where you got male and female separated would be things like squash, melons, watermelons, pumpkins, berry plants. I'm forgetting some. Oh, cucumbers. They have male and female separate flowers. So those are open pollinated. And again, remember what they're pollinated by: wind, birds, humans, insects. Self-pollinated have all of the parts in their flower, and they in one single flower, and all they need is really just wind, a little bit of movement. If you've ever heard somebody say, "Do you spank your tomatoes?" What they are talking about is going along and just kind of tapping the stalk, shaking it a little bit to help with the pollination inside the flower. There are a lot of fruits and vegetables that are self-pollinators. Tomatoes are one, peppers, eggplant, which by the way all three of those are nightshades in that group, legumes, peas in the legume family. So legumes would be like your peas, your English peas, your cowpeas, your green beans, any kind of bean, or all that are legumes, and they're all self-pollinators. They do not need a bird or a human or an insect to pollinate it. Really just wind. Okra. Surprisingly, with that big, beautiful flower, It's a self-pollinator. It does not need an insect to grow an okra pod. Now, all these self-pollinators, if an insect does get in the flower, it actually just enhances it. It helps it. It just further pollinates that flower. Your greens, lettuce, endive, chicory, all your greens, self-pollinators. All leafy greens are self-pollinators. The brassicas are self-pollinators. Below ground root vegetables, potatoes, sweet potatoes, rutabagas, all self-pollinators. Ground level root vegetables like turnips and beets, radishes, carrots, all self-pollinators. Onions, garlic, self-pollinators. Corn, self-pollinator. Leeks, celery, all herbs, self-pollinators. So all of these veggies that are self-pollinators will grow all by themselves when they're planted from seed. So self-pollinators you're going to find in both categories, open pollinators and in hybrids. It just depends on the variety, what you're planting. An heirloom bean plant is a self-pollinator, and it's in the open pollinator category. A hybrid bean plant is in the hybrid category, but it's a bean plant, so it's a self-pollinator. So I hope that clears up a little bit. Maybe it's as clear as mud. Remember, keep looking up. Bye, and have a good one.